Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. People are starting to arrive, but we have kicked off the meeting just because we're so aware of time and that we're in a little lunch break there, a little window for time. So we're going to start, and people will join us as they come. There's a nice sized room here already. I'm Catherine Sofianos. I'm from the Canon Collins Trust here with my colleague Ivor Biatis. He's the executive director, and we're about to start our webinar. We'll introduce our speakers now. I just wanted to catch you up because this is the third webinar in a series. So I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of the first two webinars and how that went. In the meantime, while you're arriving, use the chat facility to introduce yourself, say your name, say where you're from, and perhaps what you're looking forward to about this conversation, what your kind of overlap of interest in being in the room would be a great interest to us. Feel free as the conversation, as the dialogue then continues to comment and also to write questions. And when question time comes, you will be able to, we will then engage with questions. We will open the floor to you if you see your questions in the chat. So let me quickly just give you a picture of our journey to this point here today. Okay, so today's theme is the polycrisis of the political economy, its critique and alternatives. It's the third in a webinar. Let's just take it to the very first one, which took place in April earlier this year. The series is called Transforming Knowledge of Just and Sustainable Futures, and it's in partnership with the University of Bristol and the University of Cape Town. We spoke about the deep tension between neoliberalism and the public mission of the university. To move beyond this, we said we need a new social imaginary, one that envisions just and sustainable futures. This requires a collective shift in consciousness toward cooperation, care, and an acknowledgement of our interconnectedness with all people and all living things. It also means valuing diverse ways of knowing and understanding the world. As Achille Mbembe reminds us, living together on the same planet means recognizing the in common, the possibility of other relationships, other ways of inhabiting the earth and of repairing it. We then proceeded the following month or so later with Rebecca Tarlow. It's a fascinating webinar in which we delved into the critical intersections of social movement learning and scholar activism at a time when higher education faces increasing challenges. You may remember, if you were there, it was just about the time that Columbia was coming under so much pressure, University of Columbia. From Brazil to the United States, academic voices connected with social movements, emphasizing how activist knowledge, not just scholarly insight, can reshape institutions and resist encroaching attacks on academic freedom. Through rich examples, panelists reflected on how learning is transforming beyond classrooms into public spheres of struggle, informing new forms of knowledge, rooted in collective action. This conversation invited us to reimagine the university, not as an isolated ivory tower, but as dynamic sites of resistance, solidarity, and radical democratic possibilities. Today, we talk about the fact that South Africa, like many other countries today, is facing a deep, multi-layered crisis. It affects politics, the economy, society, culture, knowledge systems, and the environment. At the root of this crisis is corporate-driven globalization powered by neoliberal ideas and policies. These symptoms have increased inequality worldwide, fueling unemployment, poverty, hunger, and social harm, while also empowering militarized states and authoritarian regimes and attacks on democracy everywhere, really. Alongside these challenges, however, social movements and communities are creating alternatives. They are experimenting with new forms of organization, awareness, and education that point toward more just and humane ways of living together. Facilitating this conversation, this webinar, which will build on the discussion of the previous two events and invite participants to engage with alternatives within the broader debates, is Leon Tikly. Leon Tikly is a former Canon Collins scholar. He's a fellow of, he's an alum. He's a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, and he holds the UNESCO chair on transforming knowledge and research for just and sustainable futures at the University of Bristol. Leon serves as a visiting professor at UCT and University of Johannesburg. He's a fellow of the British Academy. His scholarship over many years is informed by critical realism, post-colonial and decolonial perspectives, grounded in a commitment to social, environmental, and epistemic justice. Over to Leon.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Catherine, for that kind introduction, and also for putting Enver's talk into the bigger context of the seminar series. I'm very excited to be chairing this event today. I've known Enver's scholarship over many years, and it's been incredibly influential in my own work, but also in that of many other colleagues that I've worked with over the years. So I'm really looking forward to the talk today, Enver. And I think many of us will know Enver. He works at the Centre for Integrated Post-School Education and Training at Nelson Mandela University. But he's worked in the field of education for some 5 decades, during the course of which he has worked in the labour movement, as an education non-governmental organisation within an education non-governmental organisation. He's worked in government and at various universities. Enver is presently an associate of the Centre for Community, Adult and Worker Education at the University of Johannesburg and the Centre for Post-School Education and Training at the Nelson Mandela University. So we're delighted to welcome you today, Enver, and you will have half an hour to present, and then I will open up the floor to participants to ask questions. So please, if you have some thoughts as we go along or questions, do put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those. But then also there'll be a chance for people just to raise your hands and ask questions of Enver at the end. And as is the norm with these seminars, the idea is for them to be generative. So we'd really appreciate, a spirit of dialogue and conversation and constructive engagement. Okay, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Enver.
Well, really, thank you very much. And I hope I do justice to your expectations and to this particular line of work that Canon Collins is doing. I think these are very important seminars. Let me say also right at the beginning that some of the slides I'm going to use, I actually culled from slides which were produced by Rasigan Maharaj, who is at the at IERI at TUT. So thanks to Rasigan, but thanks more generally to all those people I've worked with over all these decades, especially in the last 2 or 3 decades, around the issues that I'm going to, the ideas I'm putting forward really are just kind of attempt at summarizing some of the most important questions and the strategies and the answers and the approaches we want to adopt in trying to deal with this contemporary global mess. I don't want to use any fancier language than that. It's simply exactly that. And this present genocide is really indicative of exactly that is. So thank you very much. Now, also, I'm going to go through the first few slides rapidly because they really are a reference to. Can you hear me properly? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Enver. Please carry on.
Okay. They really are a reference to a body of data which shows the scope of the crisis global crisis, not just national, not just regional, not just for any particular small or large country, but it's global. And the word polycrisis, I think, is very appropriate for that. Somebody has defined it as you. Sorry, can you please load up the next slide?
Actually, the slides are up.
Oh, so the next one, please.
My apologies.
I was hoping that this one. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
You can see it. Okay, good.
Yeah, polycrisis could be described as a nested set of globally interactive socio-economic, ecological, and cultural institutional crises that defy reduction to a single cause. It serves as a comprehensive label for multiple interconnected crises facing the global political economy, including climate change, rising inequality, and the threat of the financial crisis. So there is no single way of describing this particular crisis, except that it has many aspects to it. It's this complex inter-solidarity of problems, antagonisms, crises, uncontrolled processes, and the general crisis of the planet that constitutes the number one vital problem. So next, I show you just two slides. The first, which in a way exemplifies this, just take wealth distribution in a country like South Africa. And by the way, you could see this in nearly every country and globally. I mean, 0.001% own 15% of the wealth of this country, and the top 10%, 86%. The top 0.1, 33% of the wealth in this country. And it shows the extraordinary concentration of wealth, which is not just the case in South Africa. So if we go to the next slide, you will see that, in fact, one of the reasons why this is happening, it's not something which people draw a direct connection with. But if you look at military spending, and of course, things like space exploration and so on, by poorer countries, by countries like India, which has 50%, 51% of the population unable to have ordinary ablution facilities. You know, this is the scale of military expenditure. The US alone, I don't know what year this was, but it's not very old, it's very recent. You know, it's $916 billion, approaching $1 trillion. By now, I suspect it's over that. And given all the saber rattling in every part of the world, this military spending is really very much of the part of the problem for a whole range of reasons, which I don't want to go into now. But you can imagine where countries, nations, the global community decides that the biggest expenditure we must make is in war making. Whose interests are served by this war making? And what does it mean for any attempt at democratic and development to meet the expectations, the needs, the basic needs of ordinary people? So I don't want to take too much time over this issue, but if we move to the next slide, you will see what I'm saying is that there is similar data which shows exactly these levels of concentration in regard to global wealth, the pyramid of global wealth, the fact that the richest 1.5% owns 48% of all wealth globally. Countries, there are countries of the greatest inequality in wealth include South Africa, India, Brazil. The same data can show how skewed and unequal income levels are. It shows you.
Because the curriculum that we have now.
Oh, there's somebody there in the background. Can they? Yeah, just put off there. And it goes on. So if you read any report on the state of the world, whether it's produced by conservative and actually fairly right-wing institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, or other liberal institutions like UN or Oxfam, or important contemporary economists like Piketty, or the country reports from which this data is obtained, you cannot but conclude that the great majority of the world's population, nearly all of it outside a tiny group, which includes the USA, Europe, Japan, Australia, and the relatively small countries of West Asia, are nearly all the rest of the countries are in desperate straits. They reflect an increasingly unequal world between the rich and the poor, and this inequality has perverse effects on every aspect of life and all life on the planet. I don't think I want to say much more than that. But the effects of this polycrisis in the next slide are set out. We are now perhaps in the most unequal era in human history, shaped by centuries of exploitation, colonial dispossession, slavery, racism, and war. We are in a time of profound intersecting crises, where the rise of authoritarian and right-wing forces feeds on the failure of liberal democracy, exploiting popular grievances, redirecting public frustration into hatred against those marginalized on ethnic, gender, and religious grounds, or as refugees, and other marginalized communities. We are witnessing the destruction of the natural world, marked by the loss of biodiversity, climate crisis, pollution, toxicity, threatening all of life on Earth. Economic and financial inequalities are deepening. They're not reducing. Piketty's data shows us very clearly throughout the 20th century what was happening to inequality. They're exacerbating frustration and anger, fueling systems of oppression and violence rooted in gender, caste, class, race, ability, and sexuality. So in that sense, neocolonial exploitation persists as imperialist powers maintain their unipolar control over the world. Let me get on beyond that, because this is where I really want to say that despite this crisis, despite all of this, it's paradoxical that it is clear that despite this tremendous concentration of wealth and the means for producing it through the extractive and exploitative processes against nature and human beings, has resulted in the real possibility for socialized production. That is, for a mode of production based on the actual capacity to produce the goods and services required for all humanity, and for its intellectual, practical, and based on its intellectual, practical, and technical capabilities. The only condition that prevents this from happening lies in the extraordinary violence and power which the globally dominant ruling classes have at their disposal, which allows them to oppose and destroy this possibility by using militarized systems and controls over work and production. But the objective conditions, and this is the point I want to make, the objective conditions for a global systemic and structural transformation, a transformation of social relations based on democratic socialist values, a common humanity, and its implications for the care of the environment now exist. The conditions are there for it, the objective conditions. We can talk about the subjective requirements of that, but objectively, given the level at which we are producing wealth for the whole of humanity, there is nothing which prevents us from actually making this a completely different kind of world. And I say this because, as this quote I've got from somewhere, it says that humans like me, you and all our ancestors are programmed to create and innovate. We wouldn't be here otherwise. The computer or the smartphone or the printing press wouldn't have been invented if writing and mathematics hadn't been invented centuries before capitalism was. The wheel was invented before capitalism, and it was invented by people who figured out how to make their lives easier, to do less hard labor, to give themselves more time to think and create and innovate further. So that's the key premise I want to focus on, which leads us to the next slides, which is about what are the alternatives? Well, these alternatives are not being dreamt up in my head. They are culled from a considerable body of direct experience of engaging with social movements, with communities, with working class organizations, and of course with the literature. It's all there in the literature. There's mountains of it now. It's understandable why there's a mountain of it. The reason for that is pretty simple. The world, humanity faces an existential crisis. And amongst us, there are human beings who are deeply concerned about this. So now social movements, factory workers, communities, families, religious and other bodies throughout the world are busy engaged in developing alternatives in the context of this polycrisis against the ravages of the contemporary global political economy and the great harm it's causing. These alternatives, they represent a very wide range of practices towards a new system under difficult conditions created by the hostile environment and the untrammeled power of the market. Yes, these are under very difficult conditions. Let's not have any illusions about that. But yet, these communities have managed to build resilience, produce useful goods and services, create alternative markets, independent of the profit motive. They are providing livelihoods to millions of people in many parts of the world. They represent producers, consumers, services of all kinds, and they've also produced very useful knowledge and insights about the emerging alternatives and its possibilities through a variety of modes of production, distribution, and consumption, markedly different from the dominant models of the profit-obsessed capitalist system and corporate globalization. So I continue along that vein in the next slide, which says that there are movements for ecological and interspecies justice, indigenous community sovereignty, feminist liberation persists in resisting oppression while envisioning and building other futures. And across the world, grounded practice of radical democracy and autonomy demonstrate other models of politics, economics, and society rooted in solidarity, rooted in struggle, rooted in reciprocity, in mutual aid amongst human and the more than human world. Regional and global alliances are beginning to appear everywhere, connecting struggles, strengthening collective power. We all recognize that land and water hold our histories, our cultures, our autonomy, and our future. It's taken from a very nice report on the path towards radical democracy. So today, some of these movements and collectives are small groups of individuals, others larger, and yet others national and global in their scope. They exist in countrysides, villages, small and large towns, cities and metropoles. They exist in nearly every country in the world, whether highly industrialized capitalist economies or small and struggling countries. They exist in many forms: social, economic, cooperative, trust, wealth trust, producer and consumer collectives, and in every sector of the economy, including agriculture, clothing, footwear, health, care, education, information, growing hugely in relation to environmental issues. And regarding the cooperative movement, which is one such element of this, today, cooperative members represent at least 12% of humanity as business driven by values and not by remuneration of capital. The 3 million co-ops on earth act together to build a better world. Can we move on to the next? Now, so what we learn from these emerging movements, these developments, these practical, oriented, solidaristic, and struggle-oriented movements and organizations, we're learning a set of principles from them, which many people are applying already. They're not just abstract theoretical principles lying in some academic journal or elsewhere. The principles, of course, are about radical democracy and autonomy through solidarity struggle. I think we can easily now say that these are socialist objectives. They understand the value of continuous learning and research with and through organization, not as academically discrete activities. They rely on the incorporation of long-established local and indigenous knowledges. They are identifying the barriers to social change and their relation to power. I think if we don't identify what the barriers are to alternatives, we inevitably fall into a kind of liberal discourse about it. Because then one doesn't face the real problem in the world. You sort of try and bypass it, like these sectoral development goals of the UN and so on and so forth. There's not a word in those documents, in all those voluminous documents from 2015 about the actual power of corporate globalization and neoliberal policies. And yet every report complains about financing, etc., and governance, and so on and so forth. And not a word about the real barriers. I mean the structural and systemic barriers. I don't mean barriers like we don't have good enough teachers, we don't have good enough curriculum. No. These are barriers which arise from a greater causal power, and that is really the power of a unipolar world trying to design all development according to its whim and it's in its interests. So we are understanding the environmental crisis as it affects poorer urban and rural communities. We're understanding the critical role of women in social change processes for radical democracy and freedom. I can't stress this more. I mean, after having listened once or twice to what the Syrian, I forget the name of the group of women who are busy setting up, have occupied land in Syria, not the Rohingya, but anyway, some of you probably know who I'm talking about. But when you hear what they have been able to achieve, you realize that actually, in some ways, without women's, the kind of social change, and it's not some romantic idea. It's an idea, well, I don't want to talk about it at great length, but even classical radical texts on the political economy don't pay much attention to the process of social reproduction. There's enormous concentration on factory production and its exploitative relations, the reification of labor, etc., the creation of use and other values, etc. But there is very little parallel until recently, parallel literature on the extraordinary importance of what happens in the sphere of social reproduction. And that's where our families are. That's where women are in the main. So unless we pay attention to that, and that's what these solidaristic social systems are telling us. And of course, the environmental crisis. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Oh, well, I think I've done quite well. This is yes, it is the last slide. So that allows me to say a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Enver. You've got about 10 minutes left.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Leon. As you see, I was rushing a bit, but anyway, because I've not done presentations in this mode with slides, and so it's not something I have lots of experience about. and so I've rushed it a bit. But I hope it's reasonably clear what I said. I want to say that the big issue that troubles us, all of us who are struggling to establish a new global order based on a set of democratic and socialist principles, I think that the thing that troubles us most is, well, how do you get there? Oh, as I have argued, and we could have an argument about that, I think the objective conditions for worldwide production systems based on the rapid information of transmission of information, the fact that there are huge centers of production which are producing goods which are distributed globally, the fact that the communication systems are so rapid, the fact that there are these enormous transportation systems, and most importantly, there is now a body of human knowledge and about work, which could easily be converted from the kinds of exploitative, profit-driven work regimes to work which is socially useful and socially productive. It's an extraordinary leap that is entirely possible. To work which is based on exploitative, demeaning, racist, and violent relations, to work which is socially useful, redemptive, creates a new humanity, a new world for all of us. Where I think, if you take a long view of history, I'm not saying tomorrow, I'm not saying that this will happen in my lifetime, but I'm saying that if you take a long view of history, remember, human beings have acted in communities for at least 10 or 12,000 years, okay? And this dastardly system which now dominates the globe, dominates us, is barely 300 or 400 years old. It's not a permanent feature of human existence. It's not. It is as ephemeral as its crises are beginning to show us that really it has no place in the future of humanity, but it does require several things to be done contemporaneously. Why? Because the barrier is the violence of opposition, the violence of the media, the power of obfuscation. Millions upon millions of ordinary working class people believe in the kind of the ideological obfuscation that is paraded by the most powerful forces in the world. So I have no doubt that we are on the path, humanity is on the path of a new world order, a democratic socialist world order. And what John Foster, Bellamy Foster, who's a great environmentalist, radical thinker on that issue, says that in this article, he talks about the neo-fascism led by Make America Great Again. That's what he's analyzing. He provides an analysis of the meaning of this revanchist, neo-fascist, racist movement led by Trump and his Republicans, and of course the oligarchs of the biggest corporations in the world. Unfortunately, supported by millions of ordinary working class people. So what he says is that there are two major possibilities which are likely to emerge against this neo-fascism. The first of these is that a popular front between socialists and liberals. This does not appear to be possible in the United States at present, given that liberalism has turned into neoliberalism, and there is a kind of neo-fascist, neoliberal alliance with the neo-fascists increasingly in the driving seat, and the neoliberal, the Democrats of the US, the Labour Party of England and of the whole of Europe, and the nationalist movements in the developing in the structurally underdeveloped countries of the world. I don't want to use the word developing or third world. I think the appropriate title for them is the structurally underdeveloped, deliberately, politically, historically underdeveloped countries of the world, where they have allies, where the Trumps of this world have allies. The other possibility, he says, is modeled on the resistance in the Second World War that was led by communists and socialists who understood, as figures like Brecht argued, that you could not effectively oppose fascism without opposing capitalism. Socialists have to be the sharp point in any collective resistance on behalf of humanity as a whole. That's what he says. I think that he's leaving us with some very important issues to talk about. I know there are huge discussions about socialism and socialists. I want to urge those who can to look at a recent issue of sociology in South Africa. I must find it and send it to whoever is to you, Catherine, so that you could distribute it. In which this issue of what exactly do we understand by socialism in this contemporary period, relative to how it has evolved historically, including in countries like the Soviet Union and so on and so forth. And we have to struggle with our own definitions of it, with our own approaches to it. And I think that intrinsic to it is democracy, but a different kind of, not this fallacious, fictitious democracy which rules the world at the moment. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Enver, and I'm sure we all like to share in thanking you for a very comprehensive and interesting seminar. Excuse me, I'm just about to sneeze. It's not a reflection on what you've been saying. So I just had a mild allergy just as I started talking, but what a wonderful talk, and thank you so much. I'm sure all of us would like to join in thanking you for that. And you know, you've raised some critical issues. I'd like to make one or two connections, if I may, to some of the earlier the two other seminars in the series. So you framed your talk in terms of your analysis of the polycrisis, and in my own seminar, I did a similar thing. I referred to an organic crisis of global capitalism, which has which involves the cascading interdependence of different kinds of environmental, political, economic, and other crises. So cultural crises as well. So I think there's a very interesting conversation to be had, about the nature of the polycrisis and how it can be conceptualized. I'm interested, for example, in the, I'm very aware that your own work over many years has been influenced by Marxism, and you made reference in your talk to the mode of production and to basic Marxist principles of political economy. I at some point it would be great to have a more in-depth conversation with you about your take on Marxism in the 21st century. I mean, you provoked us to think about the future of socialism as well, and I think that's right. So with at a theoretical level, how does one conceive of class struggle in relation to the other kinds of struggles that you mentioned, those of women against patriarchy, of indigenous people, of people of color against racism, of environmentalists, and so on. So how does one conceive of how these struggles articulate, to use Stuart Hall's terms? Are we, in your work, do you still see the class struggle as being paramount, or do you see it more in terms of the development of in more Gramscian terms, perhaps, as the development of a more counter-hegemonic movement, of which socialists play a leading but equal role to other members of that movement? You mentioned liberals, but there might be others as well, environmentalists and feminists and so on. So it would be interesting maybe just to probe you a little bit more on the theoretical aspects there, how you see the articulation of these different struggles, and also I think it would be great to I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you see the role of education and learning, because of course you've made a stellar contribution to our understanding of learning, both in formal and informal settlements through your career. And you didn't have time to go into it so much today, but clearly the education system has a critical role to play, both in terms of, obviously in terms of teaching and pedagogy, research, but also of how universities relate to communities. Whether the traditional, it seems at the moment that there's a battle for the very heart and soul of universities and the higher education system between more neoliberal models and models that are based more on the idea of a pluriversity, the idea that universities must engage in teaching and research and outreach with their communities, come down from the ivory tower and engage with activism and struggle. So it would be useful to understand a little bit more about your perspectives on that as well, the role of education. And the last thing that came to mind was you were very clear about the need for a socialist movement, an alliance against global capitalism, and you talked about the US quite a lot, and I wonder what the role of the global South is in this. What is the role of socialists and other progressives at the moment in the South, in countries such as South Africa, which are also, experiencing, a double kind of in exclusion, marginalization, injustice, within the global capitalist system on account of being, a middle income country, but also, as you pointed out, of being very unequal in itself. To what extent is the genocide in Gaza, actually, a focal point, although it's happening in the so-called, South, if you like, what is it? What is the significance of struggles and in the global South, whether in South Africa or Gaza, for the wider struggles that you're talking about? So that's a lot to consider. You've clearly got me thinking, and I'm sure that's the case with everybody else. And I'm looking forward to other people's responses and questions. But back to you, Enver, and then we'll open up to the rest of the audience.
All right. Well, thanks very much. I see somebody by the name of Professor Reddy was worried about. No, Professor Reddy. I've attempted to understand Theon's questions. I think that I can categorize them into four very useful questions, very important questions, actually. No, Leon, the first issue is that I don't give primacy to class for the simple reason that there is no struggle anywhere in the world which is not a combination of a whole range of oppressive measures. So it's impossible to characterize colonialism as a struggle against the working class without at the same time seeing how extraordinarily racist it is, how gendered it is, how destructive of the environment it is. No, I think, those kinds of dogmatic approaches to class issues are way beyond us. I think they stuck with some of us till the middle of the last century, or well, a little beyond that. But I think these days, and especially with the extraordinary literature that's come out of feminist writing, especially social reproduction theory and so on and so forth, and of course our own work on racism, I mean, there's that book which we put together on capitalism and racism. What do we call it? I've forgotten. Between Vali and myself, it was really on the works of Neville Alexander. Racist capitalism. Racist
Yes.
capitalism. Precisely to signal what we're saying, that it's impossible to understand the nature of the present world by looking at single characteristics like racism or class or gender. I mean, otherwise we degenerate into a kind of identity politics, that the single most oppressive thing is this or that or the other. No, it isn't like that, because in the real life of ordinary people, in the real life, especially of working class communities, these struggles and the oppression they suffer is multifaceted and is often indistinguishable. So in the same way, from an analytical point of view, you cannot privilege a particular category of analysis like class. And that is what, old people in the old communist parties did. But I suspect even they will be somewhat coy about that today. The second point I want to make is that like everything else, there are multiple conceptions of what can be done in opposition to the present power of globally hegemonic regimes of policy in relation, let's say, to education or health or housing infrastructure or environment, etc., etc. But each of the approaches, let's be very clear about this, there is no single approach. There are a multiplicity of approaches. But every approach bears with it the hallmarks of its identity, of what it represents, whose interests are represented. As we know, in the environmental world of environmental struggles, this idea of a green world and so on and so forth, is a classic case of how you could obfuscate, or that there are two very differing, the whole SDGs, for example, also, which was imposed on after structural adjustment, came this liberal attempt trying to resolve some of those questions. So the point I'm making is that for every single theoretical premise about how to deal with the problem, there is a set of underlying assumptions. And our job is to examine those assumptions and see which one of those speak really to the critical problematic of power and social relations. For me, those are some of the absolutely critical, in relation to any social theory. If it doesn't deal with questions of power and social relations, it's just liberal, capricious mumbo jumbo, in my view. The same thing I would say, well, separately, your question of universities and communities. Leon, as Ivor will tell you, I can talk about that. Some of us, not just me, my colleagues and I can talk about it for a very, very long time, because we are really worried about the structural impediments which universities themselves bring to any real understanding of the relationship between universities, knowledge, and communities. About the biggest barriers to the to the formation of collective knowledge, collective solidaristic struggle-based social knowledge, socially useful knowledge is academic knowledge, or the conventions of academic knowledge. Because what universities are expecting people in this world, in this realm of work, relating to communities, is really quite asphyxiating. It in every way, it impedes what you can do. There is no fundamental understanding of the nature of communities, of the relationship with communities, no understanding of the rigors of research in and with communities. No, there's all this big talk about community engagement. You know, it's really completely, it's largely vacuous, because it's either based on some charitable disposition to the communities. These are these poor communities. We must go and help them. What a desperate situation they're in, you know, or it's some utilitarian thing. You know, we have knowledge, we know everything. And so on Saturday classes in mathematics, since we are so great at it, we must do the mathematics on Saturdays. I'm not against all of that. You know, I'm not viscerally against it. You can do that, but don't pretend that it is more than it is. That's the point, though, that I think most of us are making. We can do that work, and some people are doing it and doing it valiantly against all the odds, and it has use. It definitely has use in communities, especially of the working class and so on, so forth. But that is not about community struggles beginning to identify the means by which we can support communities to achieve the kinds of outcomes which are long-term, sustainable, and liberatory. That's the point about it. And of course, talking about the last point, which is about, yes, the key to, so have I understood it properly? I'll tell you what I wanted to say, that, look, ultimately, the key levers for change, for socialist change, for democratic socialist change, for fundamental change, for change which transforms the nature of social relations and gets rid of the kind of system dominant global system, the hegemonic, to use Gramsci's words, global system. At the moment, others might disagree, see the locus of the impetus for that in social movements. Not so much presently in the trade union movement, in which we were all heavily implicated. Not so much there, because they too have taken such a fantastic hammering from the side of capital that they are at the moment fighting what I regard as a rear guard, a defensive struggle. You know, in this very city where I am, they are busy closing up the big tire factories, they're busy the motor companies are going to be in serious trouble, the global tariff regime, but also just the idea of profitability overtakes everything else. So while I am not opposed, the Palestinian question, our states and the various states attempt at trying to bring the Zionist genocidal state to reckoning in the International Court of Justice. While I'm not opposed to that, who could be opposed to that? You know, but as you can see, the global framework of constitutionalism and rule of law, once again, stands as a bulwark against real change. You can see that. You can see that. How many years will it take before that matter will be heard? And how many more hundreds of thousands are likely to be dead before that? They are dying right now while we speak. From the beginning of the seminar till now, I suspect 8 or 10 little lives have been murdered. I think that, unfortunately, the social forces, it's something which I obviously am not going to say this is the only thing. I think we need to have many more discussions about it. Who is the social force for change? What is a social force for change? I don't think it's the state. because certainly not the state, the comparable state, which is up to its eyeballs in cahoots with global neoliberalism. All our our policy, fiscal and macroeconomic policies, and all our social policies. We are busy laying the framework for a totally privatized world, a world which only the very rich corporations, not just rich corporations, but very rich corporations have. So I'm not against the idea that states, third world, or as I said, structurally underdeveloped states. I don't like third world or whatever the case may be, because within the third world states, by the way, there are states which are more in cahoots with U.S. capitalism than others. So I think the distinguishing mark has to be the characteristic of structurally underdeveloped states, and that's who I think in there the big shakers and movers have to be ordinary people, but acting collectively, acting solidaristically, understanding struggle. And we, by the way, in academia, we have a role, unless we think that we are too far removed. It's just not on for us to do that kind of work. We're really just intellectuals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enver. And I'm glad that you had that opportunity to expand further on some of the points that you were making. That's brilliant. I should just say that I was actually asked to also respond to Enver's talk, so I do apologise for my very long question, but it was in that spirit of wanting to try and relate it to other talks in the seminar series. But that's really helpful. And can we perhaps open up the floor now? So please do let me know if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Enver. Either pop them in the chat or raise your hands, and that will be great.
There's a question from Rasigan, Leon.
Oh.
Okay. Is that in the chat?
He raised his hand.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
thank
right.
you. Rasigan, please.
Thanks, Leon, and apologies for not writing the question in. I was following your instruction itself and just picked my hand up, yeah? So thanks so much, Enver. You know, it's always an education engaging as well. And there's something that you've now raised, which is a little different from previous engagements on this topic itself, which is the nature of polycrises themselves. And if you don't mind, I'd like to throw it back to you in terms of how does this afford us the opportunity to get to the root causes of the challenges that confront us? I really, in terms of, as you mentioned, as we are talking, people are being killed. And as a consequence of that, yeah, how is it that we can respond such that the complicity and culpability of those of us in academia does not continue to feed this machine itself? And I think the notion of the polycrisis, the way in which it is nested, allows us to see this. A last point for me on this is the notion of the grand narrative itself. Our history and how we've come to be and where we are today, relative to the challenges that we are facing. And I really think it's also an opportunity for us to recast the language that we use, even in terms of geography, etc., to describe ourselves as opposed to the way in which we are described by others. I hope that makes sense. Thanks, colleagues. Thanks very much, Leon.
Thanks, Rasigan. That's really helpful question and contribution. And actually, there's a comment in the chat as well from Mikhail that kind of adds to that. So it relates to what Rasigan was talking about, Enver. So I'll read it out, and perhaps you can respond to both. Well, you can probably see it for yourself. But Mikhail's asking, while the term crisis usefully describes the symptoms, it mystifies the root cause. These are not separate crises that unfortunately happened at once. They are logical, inevitable manifestations of a single deeper crisis, the crisis of capitalism itself. I wonder if that was perhaps implicit in what Rasigan was saying.
Yes.
The endless drive for profit inevitably leads to ecological plunder. Well, you can read it yourself. Shouldn't our analysis move beyond managing symptoms to diagnosing the terminal disease?
Yes. Well, Leon, can I?
Yes, please.
Firstly,
Yeah.
hello, Naren. You're absolutely right. It is about Rojava that I was talking about. Yeah, it's exactly that. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of it. Yeah, the deeper elements of the structural crisis. Well, I don't have any other answers. I don't have any, because as I said, that the causal explanation for this crisis is in the very nature of the global system, the global structural systemic dominance of a particular set of social relations which are driven by the power of militarization, etc. That's what it is. It lies in that. That I may be missing something, but that's exactly where I think the problem really lies. That we all have taken almost for granted that the prevailing system, structural system, is all that we have, and it's that system which we somehow have to manipulate and rejig and change in some way so that we could get past the very many crises. You know, about a year ago, I read something which was suggesting that, is this a crisis in capitalism or is it a crisis of capitalism? I think there's a very important distinction. At that time, in fact, that's what I said in an article I wrote for some other journal, I can't remember now. I said, well, you know, what we're talking about at the moment is a crisis within capitalism. I'm more and more convinced, given the developments of the last 12 months globally, the war, actually, you know, to be quite honest, for myself, the thing that has brought to a head the nature of the global crisis, the Polycrisis, the nature of it is Palestine. It symbolizes for me, it's a metaphor for exactly what this dastardly world has been reduced to by those in power. That's what it is. And so it's a combination of their forms of power, physical power, their military power, in other words, their ability to shut you down by killing you off, the power these extraordinary forces have over your thought processes. You know, I mean, how many newspapers and BBCs rule the world? You know, have in India now we see that it's Ambani's one paper has 60% of the media. You know, so and in addition to that, all the structural regimes of trade, of debt, of finance, this is such a powerful body of forces, which the minute a structurally underdeveloped country raises its head, they simply knock it down again and say, look, you haven't, you know, we'll lend you money, but if you don't know how to pay it back, and the way to pay it back is to cut back on public services. I mean, it seems to me to be the obvious and simple answer. What's happened in the world over the last 40 years? Take all the money that you've been using for public services and redirect them towards borrowing money and increasing the structural hold over your country by these very, very powerful influences. So I don't know whether I'm answering Rasigan and Michelle, but I think they probably have better answers than I do, frankly. But if what I heard is about the single deeper crisis, the causal origins of the crisis, well, that's the best I can do. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, Enver. And it might be that Rasigan or Mikhail would like to come back. Please feel free to do so if you would like to. But if there are others who'd like to contribute, please do raise your hands and come in. Okay, I think people are formulating questions. I think. Let me just have a look at the chat. Yeah, so we've got some very useful. We've got lots of thank yous in there, Enver, for your talk. Yeah, I mean, there's a comment in the chat about military expenditure in the US totaling $1,100 billion in 2024. And I wonder, to what extent you see, the increasing militarization of the world as either a symptom or a cause of the polycrisis.
Well, it's a consequence and cause at the same time, Leon. I mean, isn't it ironic? Here's this man who heads the world's largest neo-fascist government, pretending every day that he's bringing peace all over the world. But did you notice the terms of his bringing peace is to make the Europeans increase their military budgets from 2% to 5%. Isn't it extraordinary? It's such an extraordinary. And it's the same. He will support the Ukrainians on the condition they buy more arms. I mean, look, it may be that I'm being excessively conspiratorial in my thinking, but it sounds to me that it's the military, not just the industrial, but the military machine, especially in the US, which is driving the world. It has this gargantuan appetite for the sale of things for profit, okay? But it doesn't just send salesmen around and presidents as salesmen. It actually constructs our worldview on the basis that armed security of nations based on armaments. That's why some of the poorest countries in the world spend more on militarizing themselves. That's why countries which really have absolutely no basis for fighting each other, poor countries, really, countries in the East Asia and so on, are every day being warned against incursions by their neighbors. I mean, you can see the kind of stuff that goes on between the dictatorship in Pakistan over these years and now this new kind of neo-fascist regime. But it's been there from Nehru's time, by the way. So this is part of it. So countries of which have absolutely no basis, no business for spending even a dime on military expenditure, and certainly not on sending rockets to the moon and so on, are busy doing that. So militarization for me is really a very, very powerful part of the problem. But it's not the root of the problem. It's the root of the problem Leon, as you know, is this whole system of reproducing the accumulation of capital. That's the origins, that's the base, the root of it, reproducing it through exploitative relations globally, not just within countries, and by knocking down all kinds of opposition.
Yeah, thanks, Enver. That's interesting. There's a couple of people with their hands up in the audience. Marcus, you actually had your hand up first, so
Yeah.
I'll come to you and then to Naren.
My old comrade, not Marcus. My senior comrade.
Over to you, Marcus. You might also want to respond to Enver describing you as a senior comrade. I'm just joking. Marcus, you're muted.
Yeah, you got to unmute, comrade. Sure. It's difficult for us now.
Okay. Well, maybe whilst Marcus is sorting out his microphone issues, Naren, did you want to ask a question, please?
Yes, I did. Thank you for the presentation, Enver, and thank you for this opportunity to listen to it. The question I have is related to BRICS. Is that a realistic threat to the crisis at the moment? What are the possibilities of it making any difference? Thank you.
Well, Naren, very, very tough question. And I hope that one day Canon Collins will ask Rasigan, who is a deep scholar of this issue. I'm not being facetious, deep scholar of this issue to do a seminar. I think it's time, the issues that are arising from BRICS. And, like many people, I am critical of BRICS also. I don't have a sort of a view that BRICS will resolve the problems of the structurally underdeveloped world. I don't have that view at all. I'm critical of it. I think that some of the approaches to things need to go considerably further than they are. But at the same time, especially over the last year or two, they're beginning to put to the world the idea of a multipolar world. For instance, the whole de-dollarization event and the fact that they've been smitten hard, hit hard by the tariff regimes of this bully. This has woken them up into a kind of post-reverie about what exactly they need to do in order to protect their own skins. I'm not so sure that in the process that all of this will have wider dispersed benefits for the whole of their population and especially their poor and so on. But it's inevitable that breaking away from the umbilical cord of global neoliberalism is a very positive step in one or other way. That's as far as I would like to take it. I'm not sanguine about what exactly it means in terms of a radical structural break, because I think the power of the market is so utterly dominant now in the world everywhere, so powerful. But remember, there are huge differences between the way in which the Chinese and the rest of the world relate to the market. In the case of the Chinese, the market is regulated, Rasigan can correct me here, is regulated by a very strong state. So you can't just walk in there with your billions and decide what labor regimes you have, what kind of effects. They attempt to moderate the effects of those kinds of investment regimes and so on and so forth, which is very, very different, because everywhere else in the world, especially in the most powerful Western economies, actually it's the market that drives the state. There's really a big fundamental difference between who drives the state. Of course, there are all kinds of other questions that enter into it, which I won't go into now. But Naren, this is a very important question, and I urge that you yourself study it, discuss it, and please find a way of getting hold of Rasigan to talk about it with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Enver.
Great.
I will follow up on it. Thanks.
Yeah, and Rasigan, if you wanted to come back in, to comment, then please feel free to do so. But I know that Brighton has a question. Brighton, I understand you're based in Zimbabwe. Do you want to ask your question, please?
Yes, thanks, Leon, and thanks, Enver, for the thought-provoking presentation. I just wanted to ask perhaps something like 2 questions. The first one is that, in your view, what could have incentivized initially the growth of this military-industrial complex and sustained it, And then I wanted to ask about the flip side of things, that you speak of a paradigm where maybe there is an easing out of the current dominant system, but is there something that they are afraid of on the other side? What is happening that could be motivating the kind of behavior that certain groups may want, Yeah, I think my question is already, I might go too long. Thank you. All right.
Great.
Brighton,
Thanks, Brighton.
Brighton, you're from Zimbabwe. I don't think I need to explain to you what incentivizes the what did you call it? The growth of militarization. It's actually quite simple. The barbarism of conquest. That's what it is. The whole of Africa was conquered by these pretentious civilized states. But in order to do that, they had to employ military means. That's how they subjugated all of us in the countries outside the centers of global power in the 18th and 19th centuries. That's how they did it. Some say, well, with the gun in one hand and with the Bible in the other. I don't want to stretch the metaphor, but I have no doubt whatsoever that violence is a key element of it. And what happens is, when you then build a house which is based on violence, then you have to start putting up more fences around it. That means more militarization. And when you have one attack on it, then you have to do even more militarization. So in a way, the Western dominant economies are stuck in a vicious cycle of increasing militarization. That's what it is. They've brought it on themselves by virtue of their history. They've refusal to relinquish global power. They continued racism against the poor of the world. And in order to enforce these regimes of power, what else can they use? They failed to persuade by the logic of their so-called democratic and civilizational regimes. So now the only option. So that's the answer to that question. And as for easing out, I don't think there's any easing out of the dominant system that's going to happen. No, on the contrary, nobody gives up power. Nobody gives up power, Brighton, without a fight. So I don't think, and that's why it requires everybody who has any conscience about it to participate in building up from the ground the social movements that are necessary for dealing with this global order as it presently stands. I hope that deals with your questions in some way.
Great. You're really being put through your paces today, Enver. You're doing a great job. Helga, over to you. Nice to see you, or hear, to at least meet with you virtually. Helga, please ask your question.
Thank you so much for that. I've always been intrigued by this notion of what BRICS actually means, particularly in the global south, the reproduction of just the same greed and, but I wondered if you have a view on if this opportunity of the weakening of, the edifice of Western power, if there's an opportunity for the left in the global South to have a resurgence. And I keep on thinking about how the left was decimated during the Zuma years in South Africa. The labor unions were, COSATU as a federation was completely destroyed by the Zuma years. And I just wondered if in the global South, particularly within BRICS, there's a moment of opportunity for progressive left kind of world.
What an important question again. It's a question which we all have to struggle with, and I'm sure we have different answers. Our answers also are based on our experience in the kinds of organizations and movements we participated in. I'm not one of those who are pessimistic about the left, to be honest. I think we concentrate too much on what's going on in the left. No, I concentrate much more on what's going on the ground amongst ordinary communities, because that's where I think the real germs of what we want to develop are beginning to happen, while some of us who are sort of still constrained by being in this or that part of the left and want to argue about what is the left and what is not, I think the answer doesn't come from there. I think this left would have to reconcile itself. I don't know when last you read any history of the great big social revolutionary movements and the actual revolutions that took place. Very often, a small coterie of people who were sort of on the left realized that they were far behind what was going on the ground, actually, and had to catch up with it. And one can talk about that at great length. So I would say, comrade, sorry, I've forgotten your name for a moment. I would say that actually, recently we had Yao Graham making a presentation. I think it was for Canon Collins, if not for Moja, in which he said, this business of our focusing on the BRICS or the West in that particular way and saying, well, the BRICS is not really an alternative and so on, doesn't allow us to, as activists, to see what is a strategic possibility for intervening. That's what I think is the most important question. Because, as he explained, let's take the question of the mining economies of Africa. Okay? So the mining economies, the mining rights in these economies still belong to Western European countries, corporations, okay? But who is their biggest buyer these days? It's the Chinese. Are the biggest buyers. They would go bankrupt. Well, they won't go bankrupt. They certainly will, not make as much hand over fist profits as they are making now, if it wasn't for this very powerful purchasing power that comes from the Chinese and so on, and the great infrastructural projects that they are involved in, for instance, can have a dual purpose in them also. They could be, we could see them. No, the answer to your question is that, I think as people who are concerned about changing this world, we must look for every single opportunity we can, which doesn't compromise our fundamental, basic principles about what the opportunity represents. So we enter into any possible opportunity. For instance, I personally have been involved in any number of policy-related discussions in the education world, trying to persuade the department on the language question, on the curriculum question, on this, on that, on the other, on community education. We do that, despite, our realization that this is not really going to resolve the problem. But do we give up? Are we boycottists? Do we completely ignore those possibilities? Because there are people in there who are really interested themselves in changing these. So my answer, comrade, is that my answer is a strategic orientation. Take each case on its point, but with a view to, if you go in there, you use it to extend the premises, the conceptualization the practices, the people you bring into it in ways which opens the arena more and more widely for real long-term transformative change. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks very much for that, Enver. And we're actually coming to the end of the seminar, but I wanted to just to check if Solomon, if Marcus, you wanted to come in. I know you were trying earlier to come in. I don't know whether you'd like to.
I'm cut off. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Marcus.
can. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. I've been struggling here. I'm a bit technologically unable or disabled. Thank you very much. I just wanted to raise the issue, or I think Enver refers to it, that we need to look more internally in our own countries, for example. What I've become extremely interested in the last few years is the self-organization of communities. And it seems to be quite big. And for example, the people really fighting gender-based violence in the communities caused by gangsters and poverty, but also other alternatives. It's mainly women, and we need data. And I've asked a few universities to help already to gather, and some of the people I work with, the little bit we've gathered, is quite substantial. And it's mainly women. And one of the journals of the historian materialism, in the last few years ago already, it's women driven. So we need, in fact, they've got a slogan, the future is female, precisely based on what is happening, not only in South Africa, but we need the information. And this is where I think the point about universities, they're sorely lacking in many ways. A few people on the campuses. But what I just very quickly then would say, let us unite what we've got. There are several caucus, for example, the water caucus, the cultural caucus, the health caucus, groups. We need to unite. And what at the moment seems to be an obstacle is the still continuing, what, for a lack of a better, sectarianism. And I think we need to really make a conscious effort. And I've always believed that the level, what everyone will call, will only unite once communities are beginning to coordinate with our support. Yeah? Around issues of racism, xenophobia, etc. Then, if you all unite, and of course the cooperative movement and the youth movement, etc. Yeah, but for me, it's about the self-organization. We need more information, and I think there's a huge potential there. The issue of uniting all these various groupings. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Marcus, and I'm glad you managed to get your
thank you very much.
Your comments in there. But we are at the end of the seminar now, so before I ask Enver just to say one or two sentences to wrap up, I just wanted to just point out that there's some interesting comments that have just emerged in the chat from Clint, who's arguing against reformist approaches and against a view of encouraging us to understand the state as a class, the class character of the state. And Rasigan saying it would also be very useful for us to continue to deepen our critique of the political economy, and there remains a gap in the literature. And I think really that's a backhanded way of saying how helpful your talk has been, Enver, in terms of helping us advance to think critically about political economy at what is a critical juncture. So are there one or two concluding comments you'd like to make, Enver, please?
Well, two sentences. One is thank you very much, Leon, for facilitating this and allowing me to respond to every single question. I hope that the this will stimulate more discussion, not less, in wherever people are, and in fact that there will be more sharing and more collective learning out of all of this. So thank you very much to you and to the organizer.
Yes, and indeed, thanks very much to Ivor and Catherine and to the Canon Collins Trust for organising this in conjunction with Bristol and UCT, and we're incredibly pleased to be part of this series. So, colleagues, thank you very much for your contributions. It's been a really interesting, energizing, and generative debate. So, you know, I much thanks, many thanks to everybody, and especially to you, Enver, for stimulating us and encouraging us to think in such a deep way on some of these issues. Okay, I don't know, Catherine or Ivor, whether you'd like to make any announcements about the next seminar or any other final comments from a Canon Collins perspective, but I'll sign off at this point. Thank you.
Ivor?
Yeah, no, thanks, Leon, for joining us too from the UK. Enver, thank you very much. As you can see, there's never enough time to engage with you. So we'll definitely have to make a plan going forward. I just wanted to say that there's been several requests for previous recordings that we will share with everybody at the group. So Catherine will assist us with that, with Tendai, who's also part of the team at the Trust. So we'll certainly share that information with you. And I think the plan, Leon, is just to carry on. So there's already several almost suggestions in terms of topics that we need to think about to keep the conversation going. So we will certainly send another invitation to a next webinar. And I also want to encourage our colleagues who are with us, if there's anything that they are convening, to share it with us. I see John has also shared an event on the chat. So if those sorts of events are taking place, please do not hesitate to share that with us, and we would happily also share that through our social media networks. But thank you very much, Leon. Thanks, Enver, and thanks to everybody who made the time to attend this session. Catherine, is there anything from you?
Just to say, I will send a copy of the chat and the recording of today's discussion in a follow-up email in the next 24 hours. So expect that. All the other events are also accessible on our events page, on Canon Collins events page. But you'll get that link in the email from me. Thank you for coming, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Leon.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay well. Yes. Take care. Bye.